So I want to talk today about the fool's gold that is the American criminal justice system. I'd like to put into context some statistics that you sometimes hear floated around, like that the United States makes up 5% of the world population, but we hold 25% of the prison population, or that the United States has the highest incarceration rates in the world, or that there are more African American men under correctional control today than there were enslaved in 1850. Mass incarceration is a phenomenon, an epidemic really, that some have described as a Holocaust in slow motion. Yet it's a phenomenon to which many Americans remain blissfully oblivious, believing that we do not have an incarceration problem. So what is fool's gold? Fool's gold, or pyrite, is a brassy yellow mineral that novice prospectors often confuse for gold. It looks like gold, but it does not behave like gold. It's not malleable or chemically stable, and so it's not appropriate for use as a metal. It is appropriate for use to start fires, because as it turns out, if you strike pyrite, it creates a spark. And so it's been used as a flint, for a long time. It was used as a flint in guns and cannons. I find pyrite, or fool's gold, to be an apt metaphor for the American criminal justice system today. So what in this context what in the context of prison and mass incarceration might we say is the gold? The gold is the deep faith held by many who are untouched by incarceration that we have an American criminal justice system that makes us all safer, that puts away the bad guys, that creates stable jobs for decent people, and also that prisons are only really a problem for people who are in prison. Who are the fools? The fools are any of us who believe any of the statements that I just made reflect the system that we actually have. The fools are those who believe that we have a criminal justice system that's fair, even-handed, or stable. Our system may look golden, it might look like we're doing good, but only if you don't look too closely or don't know what you're looking for. It is a fool's gold. So let's look at these premises one at a time. Prisons make us safer. Crime rates in the United States have been decreasing steadily since the 1970s, but at the very same time, incarceration rates have been growing dramatically by 500%. This is the numbers for incarceration rates only in federal prisons. It's 1.3 million people in 2013. Today it's actually 2.3 million people if you include people in prisons and jails, federal and state. But instead of making us safer, the opposite is actually the case. Because it turns out that prisons are, to use a jargony term, criminogenic. That is, going to prison increases the likelihood that you will engage in criminal activity. In other words, if you take someone who's committed a crime and stick them in a prison or jail, that person is actually more likely to commit another crime, and probably a more serious one, than if we do nothing at all. To give this hypothetical example some flesh, according to the FBI, law enforcement makes about, on average, 11 million arrests a year. In 2014, the actual number was 11,205,833 people who were arrested, which comes out to about 30,000 arrests a day, or 21 arrests a minute. By the time I finish this talk, about 315 people will have been arrested. Not all of them will end up in prison and jail, but a lot will. And we're incarcerating people at alarming rates, which means that the crime rates will be increased, which means we'll be incarcerating more people, which means that we'll have more crime, and so on and so forth. Today, as I said, there are 2.3 million people in the United States who've been incarcerated. That includes 34,000 children under the age of 18. They're locked up in institutions that many have described as criminal training grounds. Does this mean that everyone who's been incarcerated will reoffend? No, but a lot of them will. And certainly as a society, we're not doing ourselves any favors by taking those kinds of chances. Prisons put away the bad guys. In theory, we have a legal system that promises to be fair and even-handed, that guarantees legal representation even to those who can't afford attorney's fees, and a system that takes time to deliberate over every angle of a case and ultimately deliver justice. In reality, we have a system that's buckling under its own weight. Changes in policies and laws over the last 3 decades have resulted in a criminal justice system that is overburdened, it's overwhelmed with criminal cases. More and more people get sucked into the system, and they're arrested for lesser and lesser offenses, and they end up spending longer and longer prison sentences. We know that people actually break the law at roughly the same rates across demographics. So white people break the law, black people break the law, Latinos break the law, Native Americans, Asians, we all break the law, right? So we might expect that the prison system will be sort of a mirror of the American population overall. But we all know, or at least suspect, that that's not the case, right? We've seen enough TV shows to make us at least have a suspicion. You know those 11 million arrests? Not all of those people are going to end up in prison, but who does will be determined as much by their race and their class as by their guilt. For the same crime, African Americans are more likely to be arrested than white Americans. If convicted, African Americans are more likely to serve a prison sentence, and their prison sentence will be longer than white Americans, again, for the same crime. African Americans are grossly represented in the prison system, as are the poor. We live in a world in which a rich white teenager who is driving drunk with a suspended license and no seatbelts plowed into a parked car, killing 4 and injuring 9, and was diagnosed with affluenza and put on probation. We live in a world in which a top pharmaceutical executive hiked the price of a life-saving drug by over 5,000% and remains unpunished. This is the same world in which Brian Stewart, a 14-year-old black teenager from Harrisonburg, Virginia, is serving a 120-year prison sentence for pushing his way into the apartment of someone else's apartment, and leaving with $2 and a landline telephone. And it's the same world in which Albert Woodfox spent 40 years in solitary confinement, wrongly convicted of a crime he did not commit. Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative says that we have a system of justice that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. Loic Vacant suggests that the formula young plus black plus poor is now openly equated with probable cause, justifying arrests, questioning, body searches, and detentions of millions of African American men every year. Angela Davis says that our prisons are the site in which we deposit the undesirables. She says that prisons relieve us of the responsibility of engaging the problems of our society, including racism and increasingly global capitalism. Prisons create good, stable jobs. Over the years, local communities facing high unemployment rates have turned to prison building as a way to create stable jobs for local folks. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, after all, the prison population has grown by 500%. So a community is pretty much guaranteed, if they have a prison, to have long-term stable jobs for people who live there. Who gets recruited? Most correctional officers don't grow up dreaming of a job whose goal is to dehumanize people, to lock them in cages, to subdue them violently, and then somehow check it all at the door and go home and live fulfilling, healthy, private lives. Most people who take jobs in prisons either do it as a stepping stone, hoping for a job later on in law enforcement, or more frequently, simply because they don't have any other job prospects. Working inside an institution whose very goal is to strip people of their humanity has a direct impact on the people whose job it is to fulfill that task. Prisons face high turnover rates, and employees often express stress, dissonance, fear, lack of job satisfaction, and burnout. Correctional officers have disproportionately high divorce rates and disproportionately high substance abuse rates. They're more likely to engage in violent activity, and they're more likely to commit suicide. After working as a janitor in a nursing home, Chris Taylor took a job at Woolens Ridge, a supermax prison that was recently opened in Wise County, Virginia. It was only a few short months before he quit. He says, when you go into a place every day that is hopeless, and that's what it is, hopeless, it does something to you. When I left the prison, I started mowing grass with a push lawnmower and a weed eater from the back of my car. I didn't make the money I did when I was in prison, but it didn't matter. I was a whole lot more satisfied. It was like a burden that was lifted off you. The money didn't matter anymore. Prisons are only a problem for those who are in prison. Today, there are 2.3 million people in prisons and jails. There are an additional 3.8 million people who are on parole. About 2.7 million children have at least one parent behind bars. More than half of them are under the age of 10. Inmates have parents, siblings, spouses, children, friends, all of whose lives are turned around when their loved one is sent behind bars. If you're not one of those people yourself, you might be working with one. You might be taking a class with one. You might worship with one. You might be sitting next to one right now. And more. Every year, 636,000 people are released from prison and face a universe in which they're barred from voting, they're barred from living in public housing, they're not allowed to get Medicaid, educational loans, food stamps, they're not even allowed to declare bankruptcy. People who've been incarcerated almost automatically lose their parental rights permanently. People who've been incarcerated are usually not allowed to get a driver's license, at least not for some period, and they may have lost their retirement funds and disability benefits. Those who are released from prison face virtually insurmountable hurdles trying to reestablish their lives. How each of them copes with this whole new set of punishments depends on the individual and their social, economic, and emotional resources. We can tell ourselves that that's not our problem, but we'd be wrong. We'd be really wrong. And we'd be ignoring a problem that faces all of us collectively as a society. When struck, fool's gold can ignite a fire. If prisons aren't making us safer or keeping the bad guys at bay, then what are prisons good for? Perhaps the system is not broken after all. Perhaps it's actually functioning beautifully, glittering like the fool's gold that has fooled so many gold prospectors. The words of the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, you know, the one that we were told abolished slavery, it actually reads as follows. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, wherever the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to its jurisdiction. We've not actually abolished slavery, at least not completely. We've simply pushed it behind prison walls. It's out of sight. We don't call the residents slaves. We call them inmates, offenders, criminals, convicts. But legally and in every other way, they are, in fact, slaves. Perhaps the only meaningful difference between slavery before the 13th Amendment and after is that before the 13th Amendment, slaves were owned by private citizens, whereas today they're owned by the state. If any of this strikes you as reprehensible, if we're agitated by the fact that this morally bankrupt institution is operating under our watch and in our name, we need to allow the friction that's caused by brushing up against the system to ignite a fire inside us. It's our moral duty as enlightened, engaged citizens to make sure that our society, our laws, our law enforcement, our judges, our communities at large, they reflect the values that we believe in. It's not sufficient to shut our eyes and hope that the system is doing good. We cannot be aware of what's happening on our behalf and continue telling ourselves that we have a fair criminal justice system. We need to start making sparks and ignite the fire of change. Thank you.